So Unit 3, which is our Mohammedan law, comprises of three important concepts. That is laws relating to inheritance, laws relating to gifts, and laws relating to wills. So starting with Muslim law of inheritance, we all know the complete base is the pre-Islamic customary laws of succession and the reforms introduced by the Prophet. So in pre-Islamic customary laws, when a Muslim male dies, his estate will be inherited by three categories of people. That is, nearest male agnates, descendants were preferred than ascendants, ascendants were preferred than collaterals. And when heirs were equally distant, estate was divided per capita. And lastly, females and cognates were excluded. But subsequently, this position was changed by the principles of Quran and the reforms made by Prophet. So accordingly, when a Muslim person dies, that is a dead owner who is otherwise called as propositus, his estate can be inherited even by females and cognates. The surviving spouse, that is either husband or wife, can inherit. And lastly, parents and ascendants can inherit. So now, on the whole, we need to observe is the general principles of inheritance under Muslim law. So I've given in points in my slide. So that is when a succession is open. So in Muslim law, inheritance arises only on the death of the propositus. And the right by birth is unknown to the Muslim law. So there can be no inheritance during the lifetime of propositus. Secondly, the existence of rights of heirs, that is, by rule of spes successionis, which means mere hope or chance of succeeding the property of another. But succession opens only on the death of the propositus. So during the lifetime, it must be apparent that he has a mere chance of succeeding or inheriting the property. Clear? And thirdly, Muslim law does not recognize doctrine of representation. That is, the son of the deceased person shall not represent such person if he died before his father. In simple terms, I can tell you, the grandchildren would be excluded from inheritance by their uncles and aunts in the absence of their father. Next is heritable property. That is under Muslim law, the movable and immobile properties, ancestral and self-acquired properties can be inherited. But the joint family property or joint family system are unknown to Muslim law. And next is the restriction to bequest. That is, under Muslim law, we have a concept known as Mars ul Maut, which we'll see a little later. It is nothing but deathbed gift. That is, when a person is in the apprehension of death or fear of death, and which eventually results in death, the person can't bequeath more than 1/3 of his estate without the consent of the heirs. Okay, so next is right not lost by the death of the heir. Yeah, so next is joint property. This is exactly what we saw in the heritable property. Clear? And next is inheritance in the child in womb. That is, the child is in the mother's womb is also considered as a person. So if the child is born alive, it can inherit the property. In case of death of the child, immediately after the birth, the share will go to its heirs. Clear? The next is rule of primogeniture. Where a person has several sons, the eldest son has a preferential claim over the estate of the deceased father. So Shia law recognizes this rule and it confers an exemption. Okay, so right to the eldest son to claim his like wearing apparel, Quran, ring, sword, etc. So movable properties. Yeah. The next is disqualified heirs. That is rule of exclusion. Some persons may be disqualified to inherit the property of the deceased even if they are legal heirs. So I can tell you the grounds for exclusion of the heirs are like homicide, illegitimacy, slavery, religious difference, country difference, estoppel in succession, or a rule of exclusion of daughters, etc. But however, the factors like insanity, want of chastity, or any physical deformity, or even an adulterous woman are equally competent to inherit a property. Next is marriage under the Special Marriage Act 1954. That is, conditions for inheritance would be even covered under that act. And lastly, it is state by escheat. So this is well known to all. So when there is no heirs to inherit the property, the government would obviously acquire the property. Clear to this? So these are the general principles of inheritance in Muslim law. Now still more deeper, we'll pass on to the next chapter, that is Sunni law of inheritance. So all you need to know about Sunni law of inheritance is the heirs are classified into sharers, residuaries, and distant kindred. So coming to sharers, they are the relations who shares very specifically about the fixed by Quran, and what they call it as Quranic shares. So totally there are 12 sharers, out of which 8 are females and 4 are males, and some inherit as residuaries. And there are totally 5 primary heirs. Out of these 12 sharers, there are 5 primary heirs. That is father, mother, daughter, wife, and husband. So just keenly observe here, son will be excluded from primary heir because he'll be placed under residuary. So next is, so in this slide, you can see the list of sharers. That is, male sharers are father, grandfather, husband, and uterine brother. And whereas female sharers are wife, mother, true grandmother, daughter, son's daughter, uterine sister, full sister, and consanguine sister. So out of these heirs, father, mother, daughter, husband, and wife are seen as primary heirs, as I told you little earlier. So listen carefully, son will not be seen as primary heirs as he comes under residuary. So when it comes to the distribution of the entire estate of the deceased, so only after deducting the payment of funeral expenses, debts, probate, wages, legacies, the entitled claimants would divide and inherit the property equally. So now you can see in this table as of to how shares are being divided among the sharers. So the husband's share will normally be 1/4 if there is a child or a son, child of a son. So be keen in memorizing these fractions, because without these you'll not be able to solve the problems in this chapter. So suppose if there is no child or child of a son, then the husband is entitled for half share of the entire property, that is 1/2. So next is wife. Normally she gets 1/8 shares. In the absence of children, she'll get 1/4 shares. The next is daughter, who gets half share, that is 1/2. But if there are 2 or more daughters, then each will get 2/3 shares. Suppose if son is there, then he falls under the category of residuary. And next is father, who gets 1/6 shares under any circumstances. Okay. So next is mother, who normally gets 1/6 shares, and in the absence of children or siblings, she gets 1/3 shares. Clear? So next in this slide, you can see the fractions of shares of true grandmother, true grandfather, son's daughter, son's daughter, uterine brother, uterine sister, full sister, and consanguine sister. So, and again I'm repeating, memorize these fractions so that it will be useful for you when you solve the problems. So these are the fixed shares as per Quran. So each person in a family, in a Muslim law, in a Muslim family, each person entitles to get a share of up to this ratio. Clear? So next category is the residuaries. So after the sharers get their respective shares, the leftover property will be inherited by residuaries. So there is no fixed share and they are like second class of heirs. They would divide the property equally among them. Clear? So in this slide, you can see the list of residuaries. So under ascendant, we have father, true grandfather. Under descendant, we have son's son, that is grandson. And a descendant of father, we have full brother and sister, consanguine sister and brother, full brother's son, and consanguine brother's son. And descendants of father, that is father's father, that is true grandfather. We have full paternal uncle, consanguine paternal uncle, full paternal uncle's son, and consanguine uncle's son. Clear? So next category is the distant kindred. So they are the relation by blood, but not a sharer or residuary. Is it clear for you? They are a relative by blood, but they are not a sharer or a residuary. So all the cognates are distant kindred. Okay. So the deduction of property lies in the distant kindred only in the absence of sharers and residuaries. So in this class, in this slide, you can see 4 categories of distant kindred. That is descendant of the deceased. That is daughters, descendants, and daughters, children. And ascendants of the deceased. That is false grandmother and false grandfather. So whose false grandfather and mother is? Mother's parents. Right? And next is descendants of parents and grandparents. That is full brother's daughter and sister's children. And lastly, it is descendants of remoter ancestors. Remoter ancestors are descendants of immediate grandparents. Clear? Descendants of immediate grandparents. That is paternal, maternal uncle and aunt, and children of paternal and maternal aunt. So now I'll move upon to the order of succession. So it may be only one class of heirs takes the whole property. That is, either only sharers will take the property in the absence of residuaries, or in the absence of sharers, the residuaries may take the property, and in the absence of these two classes, the distant kindred would take the property. But if it is more than one class of heirs, then it would be between sharers and residuaries, or between sharers and distant kindred, or between residuaries and distant kindred. Okay. So next is the allotment of shares. So basically shares can be allotted in 3 important ways. That is, see, the entire estate of the deceased person will be shared according to this 3 categories, 3 ways. Okay, so this is very important because there are 3 doctrines which lies behind these 3 concepts. Okay. So that is more than heritable property. So the estate should be more than the heritable property, or second one is less than heritable property, and third one is equal to heritable property. So more than heritable property is being governed by this doctrine of Owl. And the second one is being governed by doctrine of Rudd or Ritten. And the last one is doctrine of equal unity. Okay, so in case of doctrine of equal unity, there is no difficulty, because if equal distribution of the property is done, say for an example, now you should remember the fraction of shares, that is the proportion of share which we saw in distribution of shares. So each relation deserves their own proportion of share from the entire heritable property. Suppose if 3 sharers alone deserves to share the entire heritable property, and if their ratio coincides, then it comes under doctrine of equal unity. Okay. So these are the examples. And suppose if the total share of all the sharers is less than the heritable property, That is, the leftover property goes to the residuaries. And if there is no residuaries among the relatives of the propositors, the residue returns to the sharers, and they would divide it among them. So now each one's share is proportionally increased, and this is called as doctrine of Rudd or return. So, but if the total sharers of the if the total shares of the sharers are more than heritable property, obviously the shares would be proportionately decreased. So the formula adopted for this purpose is to bring all the fractional shares to one common denominator. Then the denominator of the each share is increased so as to be equal to the sum of the numerators. By thus increasing the denominator, the fractional shares are all proportionately reduced. So this is called as doctrine of owl or doctrine of increase. I can say, for an example, there is a husband, mother, and daughter alone to inherit the property. So listen to me keenly. There is a husband, mother, and daughter alone to inherit the property of the deceased person. So their fixed shares are 1/4 share for husband, 1/6 share for mother, and 1/2 for daughter. So this fixed share is as per the Quranic shares. Okay. So now if you take LCM for these three fractions, the common denominator would be 12. And the numerator would be like 3 plus 2 plus 6. So total will be 11/12. So now again 1/12 share is left, and here doctrine of Rudd can be applied. So you can refer this example in page number 727 of Subara book. Okay. So next is Shia law of inheritance. So hope this is clear for you. So I'll move on to Shia law of inheritance. So Shia law of inheritance is not as complex as Sunni law, and it does not say anything about relations like agnates or cognates. So classification of heirs under Shia law are of two categories, mainly, not in the slide, but I'll just explain you. It's mainly of two categories, that is nasab or heirs by consanguinity, and sahab or heirs by special cause. So under nasab, we have three classes, which has been shown in this slide. That is, class 1 is we have parent, children, and other lineal descendants. And in class 2, we have grandparents, brothers, and sisters. So in class 3, we have paternal uncles and aunts, and maternal uncles and aunts of the deceased and their descendants. And under heirs by special cause, so we have the heirs by marriage or by special relationship. So any heirs, any person who deserves to inherit the property, who is related to this deceased through marriage, he comes under the heirs by special cause or by any special relationship. Clear? So here also, hope by classification itself, it is clear that there is only sharers and residuaries, and there is no distinction among agnates and cognates. So there is no distant kindred also. Clear? So next is disqualifications of inheritance. So as seen in this slide, so there are factors already which we have discussed, that is homicide, slavery, difference of religion, difference of allegiance, illegitimacy, estoppel in succession, and doctrine of exclusion. Clear? So hope with this you guys would be having clarity under the laws of inheritance in Muslim law. Clear? So next is the laws relating to gift under the Muslim law, which is otherwise known as hibba. So keep this in mind. Gift in Muslim law is otherwise known as hibba. So basically, a gift is a transfer of ownership in which there is no exchange or any consideration. So gift is where there's only like transfer of title or the ownership of a immovable property, but where there is no exchange of any consideration. So this concept is exclusively dealt under section 122 of Transfer of Property Act 1882, wherein it says gift of transfer existing of certain existing movable or immovable property made voluntarily and without any consideration by any person called the donor to another called the donee and accepted by or on behalf of the donee. So there should be unconditional transfer made without any exchange, without consideration by one person to another and accepted by one that is donor on the behalf of him. Okay, so is it clear for you? So gift, basically we don't have any provisions under Muslim law, but exclusively it is being dealt under Transfer of Property Act. Okay, and it's been clearly given under section 122 of Transfer of Property Act. So the very essential conditions are it should be an unconditional transfers. So the transfer of the property should not be based on any conditions and it should be exchanged only for the purpose of gifting and no consideration should be in exchange. Okay, should be done by a person called as donor and it should be accepted by the person called as donee. Okay, so the essentials of the gift are parties, subject and formalities. So coming to the parties, as I told you, is only the donor and donee. So donor is one who makes the gift. That is, he must be a major. He must be a major. He should have a contractual capacity. In short, I can tell you in that way. He should have a contractual capacity and basically he must be a Muslim. Only then he'll be covered under this Muslim law. And he should be a sound-minded person and should not be in drunken condition and should have the proper contractual capacity, that is full capacity to transfer. Yeah, and the person who accepts the gift is donee, that is one who accepts the gift. The very important condition is he must be in existence. So this is very important condition. The person who is accepting the gift must be in existence. So his age, sex, creed, religion, etc. is not a bar to accept the gift. So if he is a lunatic, the gift should be handed over to his guardian. But if the gift is to unborn child, it is void. So again, I'm repeating, when a donor is gifting the property to the donee, he must be in existence. Okay, so even a gift to the unborn child, the gift of immovable property to an unborn child is deemed to be void. Okay, so next is the subject matter. So any property or right belonging to the donor. So what should be the subject matter is any property which belongs to the donor and things over which right is exercised and reduced into possession. That is immediate after the transfer is being made. The property should be in a position to enjoy. So the possession is very important. Okay, so next is things termed under mal, which means goods. So that is property which has some value. Okay, then property must be in existence at the time of gift. Clear? And next is gift which is produced in future is void. So a person can't just gift any property which is not within his possession and where he is not able to deliver the possession to the donee. So whenever he is gifting a property, then he must have the possession of the property and he must be in a position to deliver the same to the donee. Okay, so gifts which produced in future, as I told you, it is void. So subject may be corporeal, that is which can be seen and touched. Okay, or incorporeal, that is there is no physical existence, that is merely rights. We can say it is an incorporeal property. So, and lastly, gifts may be corpus, that is the thing itself or the usufruct, benefit of things. So all this will be detailedly covered in Transfer of Property Act, But as I told you, in Muslim law, there is no exclusive provisions, but the general conditions which is being followed as per Transfer of Property Act is being followed in Muslim law also. Okay, so next is the formalities. So declaration by the donor to give the property. So acceptance of the same. So declaration. So as I told you, these conditions will be similar to that of the conditions which is mentioned in the Contract Act. So declaration must be free of coercion or fraud, etc. Okay. Similarly, acceptance by the donee. And we all know very well the transfer of property is said to be complete only after delivery of possession. So this is common for all the transfers of property. That is, a property is said to be, that is, a transaction is said to be a completed one only if the delivery of possession is given to the person who is accepting the transaction. So here, in case of donee, not just mere acceptance of the gift, but he must be placed, he must be given the delivery of possession. Only then it is said to be a clear gift, valid gift. And this transfer must be clear, unambiguous, bona fide, and voluntarily. It must be done voluntarily. So it is void if the declaration is by fraud or coercion. And next is the delivery of possession. So possession of the property should be of the nature of the subject is capable of. So as I told you, the subject, the property should have the capacity to be delivered. So it must be in actual possession. That is, physical depart it with all the belongings. Clear? So formal entry by the donee must be done. Then clear intention to transfer. So the donor must depart from the premises. He must depart himself from the premises, and the donee must formally enter into the possession. Clear? The next is non-compliance would render it ineffective, inoperative, and void. Clear? But the exception under this rule is gift by father to child. When the father, I'm sorry, gift by father to child. See, when the father is like giving the same to gifting his property to his child, and where both the donor and the donee resides in the same property, it doesn't mean that the donor have to depart himself from the property. In case of like they are members of, if they are not members of a family, of a single family, then the father, the person, the donor who has to depart himself completely from the property. Clear? So the gift from husband to wife or vice versa, or if one is co-sharer to another. Co-sharer is when both the donor and the donee has the intention to share the property, and a portion of property is been gifted to the donee. Then in that condition, this is an exception. And suppose if part delivery can be done and the rest can be inferred. Okay, it is not like if the donor wants to gift a property, the whole property have to be gifted. It is not so. Clear? Even a part of the delivery can be given, and the donee should be in possession. So under these circumstances, a gift is said to be void if it is a gift to an unborn person, or gift in future, or contingent gift, or gift with condition, and gift for a temporary period. So if a gift is being made under all these 5 grounds, then it is said to be a void gift. And next is formalities. That is a very important concept in Hibba. That is Hibba bil Musha. Under formalities, we have this important concept called as Hibba bil Musha. So this is otherwise called as doctrine of Musha or confusion. So it creates confusion because the gifted property will be out of undivided share in the property. So when the donor himself, see, if the donor himself is not in a position to exactly mention his property, his belonging property as per metes and bounds, then he should not give the property, he should not give the same to the donee. So if the donor is not the full owner of the property and has only a share, and the delivery of possession of such property would end up in confusion. So mixing up of proprietary rights of more than one person in a things when each co-owner has right until the partition of property is done. Suppose if the gift is a part of things which is capable of division, that is, it is valid unless a said part is divided off and separated from the property of the donor. But if the gift is inherently indivisible, when the nature of the property itself is by way of indivisible, that is, which has no capacity to divide, then it is valid. For example, I can tell you it is a common staircase. Yeah, I can tell you it is a common staircase. But the exception to this rule is the gift by one heir to another. Okay, so gift of Musha is an exception to gift by one heir to another, and gift of share in the zamindari land. So now a person can gift from a share from the zamindari land, and gift of share in a freehold or a gift of share property in a large commercial town. Clear? So next is a revocation of gift. So when exactly a gift can be revoked? So revocation is possible in case of a gift. Actually, before the delivery of possession is given, the gift is not said to be a completed one. And so the donor can revoke it. But after the delivery of possession is done, after the transaction is over, after the gift has been done, under Hanafi law, a gift can be revoked by the consent of the donor or by a donee or by a decree of a court. Okay, but under Shia law, revocation by declaration or consent degree, court degree is not necessary. Okay, so as seen in this slide, there are also irrevocable gifts. That is, if a donor or donee is dead, that's it. Once when either of the party to the transaction is dead, the transaction is said to be a completed one, and there is no possibility for revocation. Similarly, if the donee is related to the donor in prohibited degrees, okay, and if the donor or donee is in a marital relationship, and when both of them are residing in the same premises, then there is no revocation of gifts. Okay, then the subject is transferable by the donor by way of sale. By way of sale, in sense like it is an exception to the gift, that is, in case of sale, the transfer has been made only with an exchange of consideration. So without consideration, this transfer is not possible. So if the subject is lost, that is, if the subject is lost or destroyed or lost its identity, so this is where in case of a movable property, and if the subject of the gift is increased in value and not separable. And next one is Sadak. I'll explain you. So next is in Shia law, after delivery is given to the blood relation, it is irrevocable. But if it is to the husband or to the wife, then it is revocable. Excuse me. So it is revocable, but if it is to husband or to the wife, then it is revocable. Clear? So next are kinds of hibba, kinds of gifts under Muslim law. So totally there are three kinds. One is hibba bil iwas, that is gift for consideration. Excuse me. Second one is hibba sharutul iwas, and third one is sadaq, and the last one is ariyat. So first one is hibba bil iwas, that is person who makes the gift in return for something. So this is exactly, it cannot be termed as a gift under Muslim law because it is something where a transfer takes place for in exchange of any consideration. So there are two separate transactions under this. One is hibba and one is iwas. So iwas is for in exchange for something, consideration. So 2 mutual and reciprocal gifts have been done. So gift plus the written gift are independent transaction which together make up hiba bil iwas. But usually this is not practiced in our country, and iwas is directed for consideration for hiba or resale. Excuse me. An actual payment is very necessary in case of hiba bil iwas. So it is a clear concept wherein it is a gift and in exchange consideration is being given. And also delivery of possession is very necessary and registration is very necessary. Whereas in case of gift, registration is not a mandatory condition, but here in case of hiba bil iwas, registration is very necessary. The second one is hiba ba sharutul iwas. So this is gift with condition. It's otherwise called as contingent gift. So any condition, any gift which is being done with conditions is said to be a void one. So this is gift something with stipulation. So payment on consideration will be postponed. So there will be a condition that later the donor will be given consideration by the donee and consideration will not be given immediately. So it is something like a contingent gift. So delivery of possession is again necessary here and it is revocable until the consideration is paid. So once if the consideration is paid, it becomes the transaction of sale. It will not be called as a gift, it becomes the transaction of sale. And once when the payment is done, obviously the donor is supposed to hand over the property to the donee. Yeah, and this is sadak. So sadak is otherwise called as gift for religious motive. It is totally not revocable, but to get religious benefit or merit, sadak is being practiced. So it can be made by 2 or more persons. So the donee must be poor. So in order to acquire people into Islamic, to make them to practice Islamic culture, this sadak is being given. And delivery is absolutely necessary. Okay, and express acceptance is not necessary. Okay, even impliedly, a person can accept the gift under sadaqah. And last one is ariyat. So this is corpus can be gifted. Corpus usufruct. So as I told you previously, corpus is something which is which can be touched, right? So ariyat is something which is corpus in nature and usufruct. So the grant of license by the grantor to take and enjoy the usufruct of the things can be done. So gift by transfer of corpus of immovable property has been done absolutely. So such gift would be valid while any conditions attached thereto which derogates from the absolute dominion over the property gifted would be void. But the gift of usufruct of the property with conditions is permissible. So whether gift contemplated transfer of corpus or gift of usufruct is to be determined on the consideration of the text of the gift deed. So this has been given in Sri Ramachandra Avadhani versus Sheikh Rahim Abdul. So with this, I'll wind up today's class and we'll see the rest in the next class. Thank you.